This is Future Sense Now, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. Future Sense Now is brought to you by the Futures Forum. Stay tuned for a journey to the futures of women with host Dr. Claire Nelson.
Greetings and welcome to Future Sense Now, an online e-zine of the Futures Forum. I am Claire Nelson and your travel guide on this exploration on the future. It is March 2017 and we're celebrating Women's History Month with an exploration into the future history of women. Specifically, we want to look at the years 2030 and beyond. And why 2030? Well, the world has a big agenda for that year. Specifically, the United Nations has 17 Sustainable Development Goals, ranging from ending poverty to sustainable cities, and there's one goal especially about women and girls, SDG 5, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, and the targets vary from the most basic, ending discrimination, to leadership for women and girls everywhere. So in this series today, we'll be talking to Dr. Patricia Kelly, who is all the way down in Adelaide, Australia, and she'll be talking to us more about her feelings, thinkings, etc. on the future history of women. Let me say a little bit more about Dr. Kelly. So she's a senior lecturer at the University of South Australia, and she specializes in sustainable futures and futures thinking, education methodology, and engineering education, which is music to my ears. She's also a consulting editor of the Journal of Future Studies from Tam Kang University in Taiwan, and one of her research focus is global sapiens. So I'm looking forward to hearing her tell me exactly what or who is a global sapien. So welcome to Future Sense Now, Dr. Kelly. How are you, and greetings where you are in sunny Adelaide, Australia.
Yes, it is sunny. Hello, Claire. It's a privilege to talk to you today.
Well, so tell me, Australia is on the other side of the world, but I'm wondering if you were anywhere near your television on January 20th when you saw women in Washington, D.C. and in the Americas sort of marching and protesting what they think is a rollback on the vision of the future of history of women. They're thinking perhaps they may be entering into a backlash scenario. What were you doing at that time, and what did you think when you saw that response?
Well, that's an interesting question. Firstly, because we're on the other, well, you're on the other side of the world for us. And as Ellsworth said, everyone is someone else's other. I really like that. Well, I was actually walking in New Zealand, so I didn't see it until I got back. But of course, I've seen it, and there were about 10,000 women who demonstrated in Australia, and also women demonstrated in New Zealand as well, wow, which is our number. So women are, of course, women everywhere, thinking women everywhere, and their families are thinking about this backlash, which is one of the futures that Ramsey and Korduck predicted in 1996.
Yes.
And it's terrifying. We haven't even got the forward lash, and we've already got the backlash. So
okay. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Oh, wow. So as I thought about that, I'm starting to say to myself, well, the UN agenda is talking about really looking at women's issues as a central part of the move towards a sustainable future. And they're talking about this idea of gender equality. And one of the things they talk about, and I want to share it with you because I see here you're talking about global sapiens and sustainable futures, is the idea of giving women equal rights to economic resources, access to ownership and control over land and other forms of property, financial service, inheritance, and natural resources. Of course, they say in accordance with national laws. Now, as somebody who is teaching about sustainable futures, how do you think that this idea of having women be more active in this space might emerge?
Oh, well, of course, there are as many ways for it to emerge as there are nations and peoples. So I can't, and futurists aren't in the business of predicting, or they shouldn't be. Futures are possible, probable, preferable, and plausible. So let's say everyone might have a preferable future. However, I cannot see any sustainable future without without what we are really a bit of a majority. I think we're about 51% of the world's population having the rights to speak on behalf of the earth. And the other thing is natural resources. We have to have a different attitude towards natural resources. And that's where we come into conflict with things like shrinking resources. So as resources shrink, of course, competition becomes fiercer. As competition becomes fiercer, you get people fighting over it. And who are the people who are always the biggest victims of war? Women and children. So it is complex, hugely complex. I don't know how you jump into the middle, but it is a vision, right? Yeah. And the beauty of the United Nations is without a vision, we don't know where we're going, and any road is okay to get there. But my supervisor, or my PhD supervisor, Suhail Ayatollah, said that visions should enable and ennoble. So they should give us a vision of something better, and they should also enable us to take action. So I think what the UN goals do is give us a vision.
I wanted to clarify. So you're saying vision should enable, which is ENABLI.
Yep.
And ennoble?
Yes, in fact, make us better than we are.
That? IGNOBLE or ENNOBLE, the second word? Ennoble.
Enable and ennoble.
Could you spell the second word for me, please, to make sure we're getting it correct?
Sure. ENNOBLE.
Okay.
Ennoble.
Okay.
We
So
have it with one
idea.
Yes.
Okay,
it makes you. In other words,
it's a stretch vision.
It inspires you. That's the best thing.
Okay, excellent.
It inspires you.
So UN SDG 5 is about inspiring. So as we think about this idea of natural resources, and I was very excited when I saw that you're in the field of engineering education, and this idea about really women's role in particular in bringing a more sustainable use of the environment. We know in the past in Africa, for example, where women have had to carry water or pick firewood, they're sometimes, quote unquote, blamed, I use the word, for let's say the depletion of firewood, whatever that means. But as we think about engineering as a critical pathway to sustainability, are we on the road then to sort of a feminizing principle of the way engineering is taught or viewed, so that the way we design can move towards more of this circular economy or the symbiosis that some people are talking about? How are you trying to weave that into what you do?
Well, firstly, I think that a lot of the people at the top of engineering around the world are trying to get this kind of agenda into what they're saying. I think Professor Wolf, WULF, who was one of the heads of American engineering, said something similar about sustainability and engineering. And someone else talked about sustainagears. So the problem is that in the Western world particularly, we've only got about 10% of women are doing engineering for many reasons. It's not particularly friendly to women and so on. But one of the issues of it is the language that we use. And Cynthia Burak, I think in the United States, Burak and Franks talk about changing the language so we don't talk about soft skills, which in a way denigrates the kinds of communication skills we're going to need. Right? If you call them soft skills, then that's girly and fluffy, and no real engineer would do it. So instead of talking about things like soft skills, you talk about communication skills or professional skills, which is what we're trying to do. So there are a lot of people doing really good work, but it's isolated. And countries like India and China, who produce hundreds of thousands of engineers every year, are also concerned about the fact that their engineers lack but really good communication skills. So the 2012 engineering report from the government of India, for example, said they thought that about 60% or more of their engineering graduates were unemployable because their communication skills were so poor. Now that's on a practical level. All right, you can improve people's communication skills by introducing more communication attitudes and actions into tutorials and lectures and workshops. But to do that, you have to have people trained to do it. So you have to jump in somewhere. And that's how I really got involved in engineering.
Okay.
I've been a feminist all my life, as soon as I realised you could be a feminist, by which I use Rebecca West's definition that people call me a feminist if I do anything that differentiates me from a doormat. Right? You don't have to do very much to be called a feminist. You only have to challenge the system at some incredibly basic level. And unfortunately, of course, patriarchal societies exist all over the world, and we're still banging our heads against that wall. For example, I realize even in Australia, we rated 24th on gender equality in 2013, down from 15th in 2006. So we're, yes, in 2006 we rated 15th in the world in gender equality. In 2013 we rated 24th.
Wow. So we're backwards?
Pardon me?
You have gone backwards?
We have gone backwards.
Wow.
And the same with equality generally. We used to be one of the most equal societies in the world, and we're now drifting down the OECD levels of inequality, which is really sad. And I think this is what's happening globally. A small percentage control the world's resources, which is a long way from engineering, but that's how I got into it. But it was too hard to battle the whole system. I got into engineering by accident because a lecturer at another university was concerned about the attitudes of mainly male students towards women, the environment and culture.
Yes.
And so as a lecturer in cross-cultural curriculum development, I was asked to come in and see what we could do. And because some of the students said, well, we hate this rubbish, actually their language was much stronger than that. And they said they spoke for everyone. I thought, oh, well, maybe I'm wrong. So I did a PhD in engineering education to see if I was wrong. But I can tell you after 6 years of research, I wasn't wrong. And you can bring about change in students' attitudes in a small amount of time. So that generally, and this is what people don't often realise, because the people who don't like it and don't want it, that is the backlash people, are so loud in what they say that you think, oh my God, maybe they're right and I'm wrong. But usually it's about 10% of every student population or the population generally who resist, often for very good reasons. They're frightened, they've had a really bad experience with something. So I'm not trying to put them down. I'm simply saying we need to understand it. And the more we understand it, the better we can address it.
So may I ask you a question? So in the years that you have been doing engineering education, which you started because of this challenge of educating the male students to kind of accept more feminine, more women in their schools and work differently. Have you seen an increase of women going into engineering in Australia, or is it about the same?
I'd love to tell you we had. There's one university, I think in Sydney, that's managed to get it up to about 24%. We're still struggling to get it over 10, 11%. I mean, it varies from engineering discipline to engineering discipline. But no, it's not wonderful. It's certainly not up where we would like it to be. And whether that would make a difference, a huge difference or not, I don't know.
Well, I'm thinking though, as we go back to this idea about engineering is one space, because one of the reasons why I brought this up in the first place was because I'm an engineer, and I do have sort of a concern in type of how we've sort of structured the sustainable development goals. Like women are over here, but water and biodiversity and access to space are over there. And in reality, if we're talking about the futures of women, it can't be separated from our sustainable future as a whole. And therefore, as we look at engineers in particular as very key to the change making that has to take place in a system, it would seem to me that a very key thing for the engineering, let's say fraternity in this case, community is a better word to do,
Yeah.
is to really say, how can we in the next 5 years, let's say we have another 13 years until 2030,
Yep.
so we're running out of time already. So let's say okay, we're going to make a concerted effort to really, number one, ramp up the number of girls choosing engineering in the next 5 years. So by 2025, we have like a more really rational number. And two, we really need to also think about what are the sustainable principles and the communication styles and the ways of thinking about how you use and reuse, etc., which also come out of an indigenous culture or a more traditional culture that we can bring into the sustainability principles. And in a sense, I want to use the word feminize them, because to an extent, there has been a sort of the worldview we live under has been, as you say, garnered out of a period of aggression, and there's this idea that the world needs to move towards collaboration if we're to succeed. So as you're thinking about education and your own work, how do you see helping to enlarge what you're doing at your university to probably affecting engineering education on girls and women in Australia, and then perhaps even in the Australasia region?
I mean, that's a big ask. As you know, we're all a little light in a corner. You know, you in your small corner and I in mine. There are people doing good work all over the world, but I think we know what we can do. We know what we should do. We know what works in a lot of places. That is, you have a pathway for girls. You have mentors in schools, so you make it possible for girls from all backgrounds, whatever colour, religion, or whether they're Indigenous, non-Indigenous, you make it possible for them to see that that is a future for them. So that you need that for a start. So that's the pathways all the way through and support all the way through. Then you need people in engineering faculties who support people who want to do it. And that's one of the key factors in changing engineering curriculum. And that's what an English report found, that unless you have support from the top, it doesn't work. And that's what we found in my first university. We lost support from the top, and so we lost what we were doing. In my current university, we have support from the top, and we're trying to spread it across. But as you know, sometimes we're having to do it person by person, lecturer by lecturer, persuading them that this is a good thing to do. And that takes time. And I suspect we haven't got time.
But do we really have the time? I mean,
No,
how can we, using the technology, think at a different level and say, if there are people doing good work around the world, right? In the same way that people could spontaneously get up and decide to march, how can we spontaneously get women and the people who support this idea of the feminine principle in engineering design, how can we form a sort of a global coalition of marchers, if you will, to sort of make this change a little more fast moving? Because I don't know if we have 20 years for us to do corner by corner by corner by corner.
I agree, we don't have time.
Were you in New Zealand when those 650 whales washed up? Was it New Zealand that happened, or Australia?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. It was.
Were you there? Because you were in New Zealand recently, right?
Yes, I was. I mean, it was very sad. And they did succeed in turning back 100. I mean, whales do beach themselves. They do beach themselves, but they do it for various reasons. We don't know why. I mean, there are much more serious, I mean, that's awful, but there are more serious issues around that, the whole issue of the oceans. I mean, we could talk for a week about just plastic in the oceans, but you're talking about a meta view of what we can do on a global level.
Yes.
And of course, the problem there is that we're trying to address global problems, but with increasingly national politics. And that's the sad thing, that the global issues are going in one direction, and it seems to me politics are going in the other. That is, people are becoming more nationalistic, like Putin in Russia, President Trump in the United States. You've got this kind of nationalist backlash all over the world. So we are in a very perilous time, it seems to me.
But it seems to me, though, I agree that we have a nationalist backlash, but thinking again at the meta view of the world, I think that in this generation that have grown up with Twitter and Instagram and instant gratification and Snapchat, etc., they are more used to, say, thinking globally. You talk about global sapien. I like that term. So could you explain what a global sapien is so we can actually popularize that term?
Okay. It actually, I got it from a Finnish futurist who talked about a hybrid creature created from a grandpa and grandpa internet, a guy called Pentti Malaska. He came to a conference in Australia of futurists, and they found what he said was globo persona sapiens. They found Australians like to shorten things. They shortened it to globo sapiens. So I thought this was a wonderful term. And when I did my research, I finished up with what it seemed to me. There were 3 ways, and I was looking at engineering, but quite frankly, I think it applies to nearly every discipline I can think of, that we're educating in 3 ways. The traditional way is what you might call globally portable students, where we see the market as the arbiter. We have to produce students for the market, right? This market, whoever it is, tells us what we're meant to teach and how we're meant to teach it. So the key to these graduates is that they do any job. We do the job, any job, whether it's creating landmines to explode in children's hands in Iraq or Iran, or whether it was gas chambers built by very clever engineers who made efficient machines for human destruction. And that shocked me deeply. So globally, or they ripped down a rainforest, right? That's my job. I get paid for it. I've got a mortgage, globally portable. Then I realized there was a new approach in some universities where managerialism takes over, and they say, right, we have to do it smarter. We have to communicate better. And they came up with globally, from there, I got globally competent graduates. And they've got a whole list of qualities that are much better than just being globally portable. So, for example, at that stage, they have much better communication skills. They might speak another language. So they'll still rip down your rainforest, but they'll make a pretense of communicating with you about it beforehand, and they'll give you $200, which won't give you back your fish. And I'll give you the example of the Fly River in Papua New Guinea, which was basically destroyed by the gold mining and all the heavy metals that came down the stream. Right, so now the local people can't get the fish out of the river because the river's destroyed. But they did it with consultation. That's globally competent. So then when I looked at what the students said, they came up with about 65% of them changed their minds over a short. We're talking 1 semester, right? Yeah. Can you change people's minds in a short time? Yeah. 65% of them said. Agreed either willingly or grudgingly that they needed to change their minds. Okay? They were okay with it. 25% said this is crap at the beginning, and at the end said, oh goodness, this has changed my life. I call them converts. Interesting. And 10% hated it at the beginning and hated it at the end. So rather than seeing them as resistors, why didn't you like my wonderful way of teaching, what I wanted to find out was what was behind why they hated it. Because everyone's at a different stage of growth. You can't push stuff down people's throats. Yes. So on looking and interviewing them and researching what they wrote, because we use learning journals, I found out that a lot of them were frightened. They were scared of writing for a start, or they'd been told they were lousy writers because engineers generally are not regarded as good communicators, which is mostly rubbish. They can all learn to communicate better. So we've now got that so I called them resistings, using Brenda Dervin, who works on sense-making methodologies approach, which turns a noun, knowledge, into knowings. So I turned resisting into resistings, okay? And it takes out the blame and the shame.
Yes.
So then I'm using that. I could then start any teaching by saying, I know some of you hate this for these reasons, and we've got it down to about 5%.
Wow.
So the last one, the qualities that I then found in the students who had changed came out as these, and I've summarised them here. Mm-hmm. There were 6 of them. And these are the qualities of Globo Sapiens, who are people prepared to take responsibility for themselves and their communities and the planet. And that's what's missing, I think. So the first one is empathy. If we can't feel with another person or another group, then we're not going to get anywhere. We can't move anything. We can't change anything, right? The second one is global consciousness. Realizing that we're part of this fragile little planet floating around on the edge of a minor galaxy. And if we don't get it right here, we're not going to get it right anywhere else. Yes. So all that rubbish about other planets, well, that's very interesting. But if we mess it up here, why would we suddenly turn wonderful and not mess it up somewhere else? It's just another new world for us to pick up, as my mother would say. So the third one is transgenerational thinking. That we think, like many indigenous cultures, beyond ourselves. And I believe that First Nations people think in terms of 7 generations.
Yes.
And Confucianism also. We can learn from all the cultures of the world. We can take the best of each culture to get, like from Confucianism, we can get the concept of stewardship. Okay. From Aboriginal Australian people, I have learnt, and we're so ignorant about their knowledge and their wonderful knowings, I've learnt we belong to the land doesn't belong to us. And if you look at it from that point of view, you take a totally different approach to what you're doing. So that's transgeneration thinking. The fourth one is they're able to contemplate changes to their lives. That is, they're not inflexible, they're flexible. They're able to say, in Mezirov's terms of transformation, they're actually able to not just think critically, but act critically. And the example of that is the guy in front of the tank in Beijing. He had come to a position about what was happening in his home country, and he stood in front of a tank in order to prevent that happening. He wasn't violent, he just stood in front of the tank. The fifth one is courage. And I think that's the one that the women in pink and that women, our sisters all around the world and people all around the world are showing. The people who are demonstrating in the United States against the oil fields, the First Nation people, that's courage to tackle people who have power over you. And that takes enormous courage and energy. You know, the field is littered with people who are burnt out trying to bring about change. Yes. And the last one is being able to work for healthier futures. Our personal futures are healthier, and our communities are healthier, and the globe is healthier. If we don't have a vision of ourselves as healthy beings, and we only need to look at the obesity rates all around the world and smoking and all the rest of it, then how can we see our world as healthy? And again, Professor Inayatullah says, unless we replace strategy as our meme or our dominant paradigm with healing, we're not going to survive the next 500 years. And I think that's where women come in, and that's where a different paradigm of re-sacralizing our attitude to the earth comes in. And I think that's where women are more naturally, I think, for upbringing, because we're mothers usually, or, you know, we just have to support our families often. And so we have a more long-term view.
So are you on the side of saying, okay, like the future is female, or you're saying the future is healthy?
I think the future is above all of that. I mean, a healthy future will be a partnership society. Okay. It won't be a dominator society. And what we have at the moment, I think that's Riane Eisler's work. We have a dominator societies everywhere. You know, man has dominion over the earth. And unfortunately, many religions also encourage that idea that the earth is put there for us to exploit. Whereas in fact, if we keep exploiting it, we're all dead. The earth
Yes.
will survive, but civilization won't. So I think it will be a partnership society if we're going to survive. And to get back to your thing of can we do it fast, we'll either do it fast or we won't survive. And I think I gave you before the example of President Roosevelt when Japan declared war on the United States. And he called the captains of industry together and said, look, we have to turn industry around to making weapons of war. And they said, yes, it'll take us about 6 months. And he said, no, you'll start on Monday. And they started on Monday. If we were serious, we would start on Monday. But I mean, even in my country, we're the current government is holding back on renewable resources. They're not serious about our targets, and it's just heartbreaking. So I think there are these huge forces at play, of which women's issues are one, but women's issues are integrated vertically and horizontally in everything that we do. So that, you know, at some point we've got our poor sisters in countries where they're being maltreated, where death rates in childbirth are astronomical, such as Afghanistan, where they're suffering from war. We've got all of that at the same time as educated women in Western countries and other developed countries are worried about, you know, whether they're getting into leadership positions. So it's multifaceted, and the answers are going to be multifaceted. But the difference is priorities. If we put our priorities there, we'd be able to do it.
So I want us to close on, I think, an optimistic note, because I do think you probably are an optimist because you're an educator. You cannot be an educator and be a pessimist. Be a successful educator. And you can't have change around young people's minds without being optimistic. So as we think about this then, and I want you to just jump into 2030 and tell me a headline that you think is plausible and possible, even if it's not preferable. Even if it's not your most preferable headline. So you can choose either the plausible, the possible, or the preferable headline to share in terms of what you would like to see in 2030 around women.
I'd love to see that we didn't need any headlines at all that highlighted the position of women. Seriously, that would be a very beautiful thing. Any solutions that we have depend on our decision makers, okay, being willing to make those decisions. So I mean, the headlines would in themselves be positive. They wouldn't be about war. They wouldn't be about crises. They would be about solutions, and they would be speaking not about the world, but for the world.
Yes.
Right. So we would, our language, we would be speaking differently about the world. Growth and the economy would not be in the headlines. It would be headlines about the environment, for example. It could be that, you know, the female president of the UN had announced that we'd managed to clean up all the plastic in the world, or that we'd succeeded in getting health care for every man, woman and child on the planet, and you realise that 10% of the world's military budget would actually be able to do that. We can do it, Claire. We just have the priorities to do it. So, yeah, I feel like a pessimist, but I do act like an optimist.
What I like to say on that note, as we contemplate getting 10% of the world's military budget, as we operate around the ideas of creating a new petticoat rebellion across the internet and other ways of communicating globally, perhaps the first, let's say, class of global sapien that will form some kind of global sapiens of the world united.
I'd love to see that, Claire.
Global sapiens of the world, global sapiens united. This new citizens, woman-driven citizens movement uprising, petticoat, which will have a concrete ask, not just marching, a concrete ask is to get 10% of the military budgets of every single country in the world shifted towards health, education, food, and water security. Now, wouldn't that be a great thing? I think,
well, it would.
Based on your your work that you have been doing with engineering students, based on the fact that I know that the new incoming president of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations is a woman engineer from Australia. I think you're going to have an ample opportunity to make this change. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Patricia Kelly, for spending some time with us. Do you have any final last word of wisdom?
I wish I did, Claire. I just think, as with Chaucer, the life's so short, the craft so long to learn. It takes us so, and Groucho said, we get too soon old and too late smart. And I just hope that the world doesn't get too soon old and too late smart.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you folks for listening to another edition of Future Sense Now, the online e-zine of the Futures Forum, where we attempt to bring you more diverse voices of the people who are striving to shape our shared future. Today's guest was Dr. Patricia Kelly from the University of South Australia. She is an educator, a sustainable futures and futures thinking person, and she is set out to help create more global sapiens in the next generation of engineering graduates. So with that, I leave you to ponder your own pathway and plans for your construction of our shared future. And remember that it is better to be the parent of your future than to be the offspring of your past. Until we meet again, safe journeys.
You have been listening to Future Sense Now with Dr. Claire Nelson, brought to you by the Futures Forum. For more, please visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Thank you for listening. Spread the word. Share the future.